U.S. Navy SEALs must rescue the Russian president, who has been kidnapped by a rogue general. Today's film is an action thriller from 2018 titled Hunter Killer. A U.S. submarine called the USS Tampa Bay is cruising near Russian waters in the Barents Sea, silently following a Russian submarine called the Konek. The commander tells the crew to maintain range and stay behind the submarine. Suddenly, the sonar team hears a loud explosion in the ocean. As the crew tries to understand what is happening, the men on sonar detect torpedoes launched at their ship from 600 yards away. The commander asks if the torpedo was launched from the Konek. The sonar team responds that it was not from the Konek and that it came from directly above them. Before they can react, the torpedo strikes the ship. At the Pentagon, the military is informed that the USS Tampa Bay has gone missing. Rear Admiral John Fisk is told that the submarine has been off the grid for 2 hours. He goes to inform the Joint Chief of Staff, Admiral Charles Donegan, who is currently discussing tensions between the United States and Russia with 2 U.S. senators. Admiral Donegan becomes alarmed because the USS Tampa Bay carries highly classified systems. Admiral Fisk reminds him that there are also 110 men aboard the submarine. He suggests sending the USS Arkansas with Commander Joe Glass to investigate, since it is the closest submarine available. The USS Arkansas is stationed at the Faslane Naval Base in Scotland. Commander Glass is hunting in the Lockheed Highlands of Scotland when he receives the call. A helicopter arrives moments later to pick him up. As the commander stands admiring his submarine, XO Edwards arrives with top-secret orders. After reading the orders, Commander Glass instructs XO Edwards to gather the crew immediately and prepare to board the submarine. The crew members are amazed by the amount of firepower the submarine is carrying. The commander walks around the submarine to make sure everything is ready. He then uses the loudspeaker to deliver a speech before departure. He informs the crew that this is not a training exercise and that the USS Tampa Bay has gone missing in Russian waters, possibly sunk. He tells them that he expects their absolute best on this mission. The crew is shocked to hear that the submarine may have been destroyed. Back at the Pentagon, NSA agent Jane Norquist meets with Admiral Fisk. She tells him that she will be briefing the president in an hour and needs details about the situation. Admiral Fisk informs her that 2 explosions were detected near the Kola Peninsula. Agent Norquist becomes concerned when she hears the location. She explains that the NSA has been closely monitoring the Russian president, Nikolai Zakharin. He was traveling there before the explosions for a scheduled meeting with his defense minister, Dmitry Durov. Agent Norquist believes something serious may be happening. She suggests that Admiral Fisk send a team to the area so they can gather information directly from the ground. Meanwhile, in the Vada Desert of Tajikistan, a U.S. Navy SEAL team led by Lieutenant Bill Beeman is conducting training exercises. Suddenly, they receive new orders for an urgent mission. On the USS Arkansas, Commander Glass gives the command, and the submarine begins submerging underwater. The vessel then starts its journey toward Russian waters. At the Polyarny Naval Base in Russia, President Zakharin's helicopter lands. He is greeted by Defense Minister Durov, who briefly informs him about the growing tensions with the United States. After the briefing, Durov escorts him away. On the Navy SEAL aircraft heading toward Russia, Lieutenant Bill Beeman orders his team to place their dog tags and personal belongings into a box. He warns them that if they are captured on the wrong side of the border, their existence will be denied. Near the Kola Peninsula, the USS Arkansas is now about 40 miles away from the Russian coast. The crew informs the commander that they should be directly above the missing USS Tampa Bay. Commander Glass orders the deployment of the Seascan underwater drone. After a short search, the drone locates the sunken submarine. As the drone moves closer, the crew sees the bodies of the sailors floating inside the wrecked vessel. The Seascan then reveals a massive hole in the hull that could only have been caused by a torpedo impact. Realizing the situation, the commander immediately orders the crew to man their battle stations. He also instructs them to send a message to base confirming that the USS Tampa Bay was destroyed by enemy action. As the crew rushes to their positions, the sonar team detects unusual noise in the ocean. The submarine slowly moves toward the sound to investigate. Moments later, the sonar picks up another signal, this time coming from above them. A Russian submarine called the Volkov is hiding beneath an iceberg directly above the USS Arkansas. The Russian commander gives the order to attack, and torpedoes are launched toward the USS Arkansas. The sonar crew quickly detects the incoming torpedoes and deploys countermeasures. At the same time, they launch their own torpedo to locate the enemy submarine. The torpedo circles the area but fails to detect the hidden submarine. Commander Glass then orders the crew to increase the torpedo's search elevation. As the torpedo rises higher and circles back, it finally detects the nose of the Russian submarine. The torpedo locks onto the target and strikes it successfully. The crew briefly celebrates their success. However, they soon realize that the torpedoes fired by the Russian submarine are still heading directly toward them. Commander Glass quickly orders the submarine to descend straight down to the ocean floor. The crew initially thinks the maneuver is too risky, but they follow his orders. Just moments before the torpedoes reach them, Commander Glass commands a sharp turn toward the wreckage of the USS Tampa Bay. He then orders another sharp turn away from the wreck. The USS Arkansas narrowly avoids collision with the sunken submarine. Meanwhile, the incoming torpedoes strike the wreck of the USS Tampa Bay instead. After the tense maneuver, the crew regains control of the situation. Soon after, the sonar team reports that they are detecting additional noises in the water. Back at the Polyarny Naval Base in Russia, a Russian officer informs the President and Defense Minister Durov that the Americans have destroyed the Volkov. Durov immediately suggests preparing for war. However, President Sakharine insists that he wants to speak with the American president first. Meanwhile, in the air, the Navy SEALs reach their destination and begin parachuting down. Lieutenant Beeman notices that one of the soldiers is unable to open his parachute and is falling rapidly. At the last moment, the parachute opens successfully. The entire team lands safely and unnoticed, then begins preparing for their mission. Back on the submarine, the crew deploys the C-scan drone to investigate the unusual noise detected by the sonar. The drone soon discovers a sunken Russian submarine. The crew assumes that the USS Tampa Bay must have destroyed it before being attacked. However, Commander Glass carefully studies the damage and notices something unusual. The hole in the submarine's hull is blown outward, which suggests that the explosion came from inside the vessel. Commander Glass concludes that the submarine was destroyed by internal sabotage. Further investigation reveals that the sonar noise is coming from inside the wrecked submarine. Commander Glass immediately orders a search and rescue mission. The crew strongly objects to the idea. They believe the enemy submarine that destroyed their ship does not deserve to be rescued. However, Commander Glass insists that any survivors could provide valuable information during interrogation. Two sailors descend in a mini-submarine and approach the wreck. They successfully connect to the damaged Russian submarine and rescue the captain along with two crew members. These three men are the only survivors. Commander Glass orders the crew to treat the Russians for hypothermia. He also instructs them to secure the men as prisoners of war. Meanwhile, on the ground, the Navy SEAL team arrives safely at their destination. They begin observing the area while transmitting a live video feed via satellite to the command center. As they analyze the footage, they start identifying the people present at the base. Soon, they spot Russian President Sakharine along with Defense Minister Durov. The team carefully watches their movements, trying to understand what is happening. While President Sakharine observes the movements of his army, Durov enters the room with several armed soldiers. He informs the president that Russia is facing an imminent threat. He also reveals that he has sealed off the base and shut down all communications. Sakharine is shocked by this announcement. He tells Durov that he never authorized such actions. He insists that his ministers, parliament, and generals must be informed immediately. Durov calmly replies that he has already taken care of everything. He explains that the officials have been told that Sakharine is currently unavailable and under his supervision. At that moment, Sakharine begins to realize that a coup is taking place. When he tries to leave the room, the armed soldiers immediately point their weapons at him and his bodyguards. As the bodyguards attempt to draw their weapons, Durov's men shoot Zakharine's head of security. Durov then declares that from this moment forward, all orders will come directly from him. Sakharine becomes furious and attempts to punch Durov. He warns him that he will be executed for committing such treason. Durov responds coldly that by the time that happens, the country will already be at war. He adds that once war begins, everything else will be forgotten. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Beeman continues watching through his binoculars. The entire scene is being streamed live to the U.S. Department of Defense. Durov's soldiers escort Zakharine's bodyguards to the pier. They execute them and throw their bodies into the ocean. The United States government watches the shocking event unfold in real time as a military coup takes place in Russia. U.S. President Dover immediately calls an emergency meeting with her cabinet and military generals as they try to decide their next move. Admiral Charles Donegan suggests that they move to DEFCON 2 and deploy their naval forces. He argues that they must confront the Russian ships immediately. Agent Norquist interrupts and reminds everyone that they are not dealing with the Russian government itself, but with a rogue minister. She advises them to wait before taking aggressive action. Her suggestion angers Donegan, who believes they must respond immediately. However, Norquist insists that the Russians do not want a war. Admiral Fisk steps in and offers another solution. He suggests extracting the Russian president using the Navy SEAL team that is already on the ground. After hearing everyone's opinions, President Dover makes her decision. She orders the military to move to DEFCON 2 and instructs the carrier fleet to move into position. However, she also wants to avoid a full-scale war. Therefore, she approves Admiral Fisk's request to rescue President Sakharine. Back on the USS Arkansas, Commander Glass informs the crew about the mission to rescue President Sakharine. XO Edwards strongly opposes the plan. He believes the mission is impossible. Edwards explains that the entire area is surrounded by underwater mines and protected by advanced sensors and sonar systems. He argues that no matter how careful they are, it will be impossible to enter the area without being detected. Commander Glass agrees with the risks, but explains that they will need help. He tells Edwards that the captain of the rescued Russian submarine will assist them. Commander Glass then visits Captain Andropov in his cabin. He begins by telling Andropov that his submarine was not destroyed by the Americans. Glass shows him images of the explosion that clearly indicate the blast came from inside the submarine. He explains that the submarine was sabotaged, not attacked. Andropov is shocked by this revelation, but refuses to cooperate with the Americans. Commander Glass tells him that they are not the real enemy. He says the true enemy is the person who sabotaged the submarine and killed his crew. Glass then explains the situation in Russia. He tells Andropov about the military coup and the mission to rescue President Zakharin. Commander Glass admits that they cannot complete the mission without his help. Andropov still hesitates to cooperate. Glass reminds him that he risked a court-martial to save his life earlier. Meanwhile, back in Russia, an officer informs Durov that they have detected an unauthorized transmission near the base. Durov immediately orders his soldiers to locate the source. Durov's men move toward the tower where the Navy SEALs are hiding. They begin searching the area carefully for intruders. One of the soldiers suddenly fires toward the tower. The bullet hits one of the SEALs in the leg. Despite the intense pain, the injured SEAL remains silent. He does not make a sound until the soldiers finally leave the area. Once the soldiers are gone, the team begins treating his wound. Fortunately, the bullet missed the bone. Lieutenant Beeman then informs the team about their new mission. He tells them that they must rescue and extract the Russian president. He also informs them that the USS Arkansas is heading toward their location to extract them. The team is surprised to hear that a US submarine will travel that deep into Russian waters. Meanwhile, the USS Arkansas continues moving closer to the Kola Peninsula. Commander Glass gives the crew his final words of encouragement. At that moment, Captain Andropov arrives and appears ready to help the crew. Commander Glass orders XO Edwards to prepare the captain for assistance. However, Edwards strongly objects to giving Captain Andropov access to classified information. He tells Commander Glass that he could be court-martialed for this decision. Commander Glass promises to protect him so that he can testify if necessary. Captain Andropov studies the monitor and begins guiding the crew along a safe route to avoid the underwater mines. The USS Arkansas slowly moves through the dangerous waters as the crew waits nervously. Soon they approach an area filled with sound sensors. Commander Glass orders complete silence from that point onward. Down in the torpedo room, one of the bolts is not fully tightened and begins to make a clinking sound. The crew rushes to tighten it before the noise triggers the sound sensors. Just as the bolt is secured, the wrench slips from a sailor's hand. Another crew member quickly catches it inches before it hits the floor. The submarine then approaches a heavily mined area. Captain Andropov shows the crew an alternative path through the mines. However, XO Edwards believes they are being led into a trap. He tells Commander Glass to look carefully at the navigation chart. Andropov calmly explains that the chart they are using is outdated and incorrect. Despite the tension, the submarine continues moving carefully through the area. Everyone finally relaxes when the sonar crew confirms that there is a safe opening ahead. Meanwhile, the Navy SEALs jump into the water and begin swimming toward the building where President Zakharin is being held. After reaching the shore, they discover what appears to be a dead body. However, the man suddenly moves. He turns out to be Oleg, an agent from the Russian Presidential Security Service who survived the attack. Oleg quickly draws his weapon and points it at the SEALs. After a brief standoff, both sides realize that they share the same goal. The SEALs explain that they are there to rescue President Zakharin. Oleg agrees to help them complete the mission. The team climbs the building and enters through a balcony. They quietly eliminate the 3 guards inside. Once inside, they blow open the door to the room where Zakharin is being held. A fierce firefight breaks out as they secure the president. The team then begins climbing down the building with Zakharin. Oleg stays behind to cover their escape. Shortly afterward, Oleg is shot and killed. Before dying, he pulls the pins from several grenades and takes many of Durov's soldiers down with him. As the SEALs escape, one of the soldiers named Devon is shot and killed. Back on the USS Arkansas, Commander Glass sends 2 crew members and the mini-submarine to retrieve the SEAL team and the president. The SEALs run toward the water to reach the extraction point. Durov's soldiers chase them while firing heavily. The team becomes pinned down with no clear escape route. Just as the situation becomes desperate, Martinelli, the sniper from the SEAL team, begins eliminating enemy soldiers one by one from a distance. This allows Lieutenant Beeman and Matt to rush the president toward the coast. They jump into the water and begin swimming toward the rescue submarine. However, Matt is killed underwater by a barrage of bullets fired from Durov's men above. Lieutenant Beeman manages to get President Zakharin safely aboard the rescue submarine. Despite the danger, he goes back to rescue Martinelli. Meanwhile, Durov is informed that Zakharin has escaped. He becomes furious and orders a complete lockdown of the surrounding waters. Inside the USS Arkansas, the sonar team suddenly detects new activity. They report that a Russian destroyer is positioned directly above them. Captain Andropov studies the situation and tells the crew that he recognizes that destroyer. He explains that he personally trained the officer commanding that ship. The destroyer begins firing on the USS Arkansas, forcing it to dive all the way down to the ocean floor. The impact creates a massive cloud of sand as torpedoes explode nearby, narrowly missing the submarine. Meanwhile, back on land, Martinelli is chased down and pinned in a position with nowhere to escape. Lieutenant Beeman arrives just as the enemy soldiers are about to execute him and manages to save his life. Inside the USS Arkansas, the submarine begins leaking from several areas due to the explosions caused by the destroyer. During the chaos, a torpedo falls and pins one of the crew members beneath it. The crew quickly gathers together and struggles to lift the heavy torpedo to free the trapped sailor. However, the noise alerts the Russian destroyer above them. The destroyer's sonar detects the sound and begins circling the area to locate the USS Arkansas. Commander Glass is then informed that none of their weapons are operational because the torpedo room has flooded. Seconds later, the sonar team reports that the destroyer has locked onto their position. At that moment, the situation appears hopeless for everyone aboard the submarine. Commander Glass turns to Captain Andropov and asks him to speak to the destroyer's crew over the radio. Glass believes the sailors on that ship may still respect Andropov and listen to him. Captain Andropov gets on the communication line and begins calling out the crew members by name. He tells them that he is aboard the USS Arkansas along with President Zakharin and asks them to hold their fire. The destroyer's captain orders his crew to fire on the USS Arkansas. However, one by one, the sailors refuse to follow the command. The captain then contacts Durov and informs him that his crew refuses to fire. Enraged, Durov declares that he will handle the situation himself. He orders ballistic missiles to be launched from the Russian naval base toward the American submarine. Meanwhile, aboard the USS Arkansas, the crew manages to repair the damage in the torpedo room. Their weapon systems finally become operational again. Admiral Fisk contacts Commander Glass and gives him authorization to engage the enemy. However, Commander Glass realizes that firing back could trigger the war that Durov wants. Moments later, missiles launched from the Russian naval base are detected heading toward the USS Arkansas. The crew informs Commander Glass that they can launch Tomahawk missiles to intercept and destroy them. Commander Glass remains silent. The crew begins a tense 5-second countdown as the missiles rapidly approach their position. Just seconds before impact, the missiles are suddenly destroyed by the Russian destroyer's close-in weapon system. The crew of the USS Arkansas cannot believe what just happened. Moments later, the Russian destroyer launches 2 missiles of its own toward the Russian naval base. Durov watches the incoming missiles from his window in shock. Back on the USS Arkansas, the crew is still stunned by the unexpected turn of events. Soon, the tension breaks as the sailors begin hugging and congratulating each other. President Zakharin asks Commander Glass how he knew that the destroyer would intercept the missiles and save them. Commander Glass calmly replies that he did not know. He simply hoped it would happen. Agent Norquist then announces that Russia is once again taking orders directly from President Zakharin. Inside the USS Arkansas, Captain Andropov shakes Commander Glass's hand. He tells Glass that he must return to his duties. Before leaving, Andropov says he cannot think of any captain who could have handled the situation the way Glass did. Commander Glass smiles and replies that he can think of one. He then looks directly at Andropov. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more videos.